Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Nikki Hill.
And me, Tom Parkin. And Nikki, I'm really looking forward to our discussion with Jennifer Howard today.
Me too. Jennifer's been in the center of politics for years, first in Manitoba, then in Ottawa, more than 25 years, in fact. Her most recent role was the director for the 2025 federal NDP campaign. And we're going to talk about that, some lessons that Jennifer's taken from it.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be a discussion that prompts more discussion in a positive way. And remember, before she was in Ottawa, she was also a Minister of Labour and then a Minister of Finance in Manitoba. So we're going to talk about that experience and maybe some longer term thinking the federal party needs to work on as Abby Lewis and his team try to rebuild. And today you're going to chat with pollster James Valcke from Viewpoints Research about the public reaction in Nova Scotia long-term care strike, the one that's giving kind of more of that sinking feeling to Premier Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston.
And some good news for the NDP opposition leader, Claudia Chender, who we had on the show a few weeks ago. If you're curious about her, go back and give it a listen. It's a great discussion. And Tom, you're going to tell us about the Scott Moe government in Saskatchewan and coal-burning power plants that you find unintentionally hilarious. So,
yeah, well, okay, maybe it's me, but you'll have to wait and see. But a Scott Moe minister facing resignation calls tried to defend himself using some really tortured geopolitical analogies and ended up suggesting Daniel Smith might be an invading dictator. I'm serious. That is the way it went down. It was pretty funny. And Nikki, folks, don't forget to follow Left East to West on your podcast because we have Shauna Sylvester from Urban Climate Leadership next week. And the week after that is Stefan Löfven, the former Prime Minister of Sweden and now the president of the Party of European Socialists. So when you follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever, whatever you're listening on, it puts the episode into your feed when we launch it on Monday morning so that you're reminded to check it out. So Jennifer Howard coming up, but before we get to that, let's look at this week below the fold, tracking a couple important news stories that didn't make national headlines. Nikki, we've been following the political shifts in Nova Scotia and had Nova Scotia NDP leader Claudia Chender on the show a few weeks back. Since that interview, about 2,200 workers at 25 long-term care homes across Nova Scotia have gone on strike. The starting wage for lowest paid workers is $18.30, and union members say that they need a living wage. But the Houston government has offered 12% over 4 years. And Nikki, that's just 2.87% a year.
Yeah, it's just been a slow burn story inside Nova Scotia, completely under the fold in the rest of Canada. So I connected in with polling analyst James Valcke, Director of Research and Strategy with Viewpoints Research, to find out how Nova Scotians are feeling about the strike. Welcome to Left, East to West, James. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Your work is showing us how the public is offside with the Houston government over this strike. Can you just take us through the findings in the polling on how people are seeing the issues?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nikki, and thanks for having me. Right away, I'll let you know that, this was a poll commissioned by CUPE Nova Scotia to gather the opinion of 800 Nova Scotians. But the results, as you mentioned, were really offside. So 7 in 10 Nova Scotians, 70.5%, side with workers over the provincial government on this strike. That is a very decisive margin. We asked that to give them a choice. Yeah, exactly. And then when we asked a little bit more, 91% of Nova Scotians agree that long-term care workers deserve a living wage. And when you hit that 91%, it is no longer a partisan finding. This is near universal across parties, across demographics. Like, everyone agrees that long-term care workers deserve a living wage. These are really big findings right off the bat. And you mentioned, Tom, I believe the government's offer. We tested that. And less than 22% of Nova Scotians agreed that that is a fair deal. On the flip side, nearly 63% side with the union, which says that this offer does not keep up with the cost of living and workers deserve better. Like, we literally put the numbers to Nova Scotians that the government is so proud to have offered, and just over 1 in 5 Nova Scotians think it's fair, which means the vast majority think that's not a fair deal. When we unpacked even a little bit more on who's to blame, we asked, do you think it's a provincial government? Do you think it's the union? Do you think both sides are share responsibility? 46% of Nova Scotians chose provincial government only as the primarily responsible for the strike happening. Only 11% point to the union, and then another 31% say both sides share responsibility. But even in that, like, both sides framing, the government shares, like, the bears the lion's share of the responsibility here. Like, they are offside by a long shot.
Interesting. And so building into that, so you took the pulse of that broader public mood. So some of the right track, wrong track questions and evaluation of the premier. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Close to and to put it bluntly, this is all bad news with a capital B for Premier Houston. So close to 60% of Nova Scotians say Tim Houston and the PCs are on the wrong track. And only 36% say they're moving in the right direction. That's a significant net negative of negative 24%. That isn't just headwinds. He is standing in the face of a tsunami of public support that is going against him right now. And then we dug in a little bit further. We often have this question where we say, overall, what is closest to your opinion of Tim Houston? We give them a series of options, just generic things, and they're pretty balanced. We have about 3 or 4 that are negative, and we have an equal number that are positive. So only 4% see Tim Houston as a strong leader.
Oh, wow.
Less than 2%.
That's got to be concerning.
But wait, it gets worse. Less than 2% say he's caring and compassionate. And just over 1% say he understands people like me. These are atrocious personal numbers for Tim Houston. They're quite damaging. And if you look at the other side of the equation, the other options that they were given, 21% say he has made so many mistakes, they're losing confidence in him. And 16% say he sides with businesses over working people. These are bad. Is this Tim Houston dead man walking? I don't know. I can't tell from this simple snapshot, but these are the kinds of numbers that once they start to move in this direction, they are very hard to reverse. Voters are reassessing their initial confidence in Tim Houston, and this strike is an accelerant for that reassessment.
Yeah. And so we are seeing with polls on several different companies, polls coming out in recent months, that softening support for Houston's PCs and then the upward trend for Chender's NDP. So your poll's the latest here. What are you seeing in some of the horse race numbers, and how does that break down inside the Halifax regional municipality versus outside?
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. And you're not going to hear this from many pollsters, experts in the field, but I really don't love horse race numbers. They are the last numbers to move. So they're important, but they're numbers in your rearview mirror. By the time they don't like your party, don't like your positions, don't like your leader, those numbers change the last. So, but our headline findings are already informative. So right away, the NDP are up to 31%, and the PCs are at 32%. They're essentially tied. And for a province Houston won a majority with in 2021, this is quite a remarkable shift. The Liberals, the Nova Scotia Liberals, are at 19%. And that matters for seat math. In many three-way races, the vote splits across different parts of the province. The NDP doesn't really need to be at 40% to win a lot of seats. Now, you did ask about inside HRM or Halifax Regional Municipality and outside. The data that was been released doesn't include clean HRM versus outside HRM breakout, so I'm not able to speculate on the regional subgroups from the data alone. Unfortunately, QP didn't release that information. What I can say is that what we saw, and as you mentioned, seeing it repeated in multiple firms, pointing consistently in the same
Mm-hmm.
direction, is that PC support has softened, led by the negative impression of Premier Houston, and
Mm-hmm.
NDP support has grown. This poll
Right.
is consistent with that trend and really
Yeah.
underscores the trends happening. And to bring it all back, the long-term care strike is an accelerant. It is
Mm-hmm.
crystallizing existing doubts about Houston
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
something more concrete. Voters now have a specific ongoing event to pinpoint to say that this is why he's on the wrong track. This is what he's getting
Mm-hmm.
wrong. The NDP's been able to frame this as a values question, caring for seniors, fair pay for workers, and that framing is really landing with the public. And these numbers bear it out. And if we put this in this frame in the context of what happened during the budget and the reversal that Houston had to
Yeah.
do,
Exactly.
he is really, they are in the ditch and he is having a hard time getting it out of the ditch, and the NDP is
Yeah.
kind of collecting that positive support and that contrast position, and people are opening their mind to what happens in Nova Scotia next.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I think, we've seen, I'm here in BC, obviously, and we've seen, negative responses to a lot of budgets across the country, but it does seem like this Nova Scotia one continues to have some of the biggest impact, I think, on government's perception. So thanks for thanks for joining the show. And obviously, we are seeing here that there is political capital loss for Tim Houston going on. And
Oh
then the
yeah.
strike's drawing it down, as you're saying. So interesting insights, and would love to have you back at some point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, talk soon. Tom, you're tracking another electricity plan gone wrong story that's been pretty below the fold as well, but this time in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, we've talked here about a backlash to Nova Scotia Power, a privatized American monopoly, demanding and getting higher rates from the Tim Houston government. And we know about the Ford government kicking the can down the road on power plant investments, forcing the province to fall back on old plants scheduled for phase out, and that have pushed fossil fuel generation up from 10% to about 10% to over 30% of Ontario's total supply. But the story coming from the Scott Moe government is like truly next level. Saskatchewan has coalfields in the southeast, and ever since it's electrified, it's always relied on some coal-burning power plants. But
Hmm.
since 2012, federal rules have planned a coal phase-out, and in 2017, that date was set for 2030. But the Scott Moe government, of course, did nothing, and now they are getting shotgunned into the most expensive option still available to them, which SAS Power data shows will hike power rates by 95% by 2040. So last summer, Nikki, the minister responsible for SAS Power, Jeremy Harrison, said rather than building new power generation, he'd refurbish and extend the life of old coal plants coming to end of life past the 2030 phase-out deadline, and that would cost $900 million. Now, I don't know what the SAS party
Mhm.
thought about the coal phase regs back when Harper made them in 2012, but now all of a sudden Scott Moe says that they're unconstitutional. So
Yep.
perhaps there's some orchestrating a game of chicken with Ottawa that he thought was good politics for him. But if that
Mhm.
was the play, it's become a very expensive one. And really, it seems like it's Scott Moe government has played themselves. Earlier this year, Minister Harrison said he made a little mistake when he said the refurbs to extend these plants would cost $900 million. He admitted the cost would actually be double that,
Oh, wow.
$1.9 billion. So a big
A little bit
oopsies on
more.
that one. Yeah. And maybe they were positioning for the story of homegrown, the hometown team defies the big city boys
Mm.
about dumb rules. But the cost suddenly doubling started to change this into a story of like, are you guys okay? Because then in March, SAS Power asked the provincial regulator for 2 rate hikes, 4% this year, another 4% next year. Okay, so, you got people's full attention now. And in the filings and support materials for the rate hike, SAS Power had a new surprise the cost to refurbish these power plants, coal plants, which he at first said was $900 million, then said was $1.9 billion. Sask Power document said was actually $2.6 billion. So this is going completely off the rails. And if you think that that's off the rails enough, just wait a sec, Nikki, because Somebody near the heart of SaskPower was obviously disturbed by all this, because what should fall into the hands of NDP critic for SaskPower but some board documents with even higher costs for this project. 2 weeks ago, Alina Young, the NDP MLA, told reporters that SaskPower documents showed the 25-year cost of refurbishing the coal plants is in fact $11.4 billion. $11.4 billion. And if SaskPower wants to put some coal in the plants for 25 years, that's going to cost another $13 billion more. So the total lifetime cost isn't $900 million or $1.9 billion or even $2.6 billion. It's $26 billion. So a bit of a bombshell.
Yep.
Yeah. So Young says that the years of inaction by Moe has left Saskatchewan facing the most expensive option. The Moe government is ideologically opposed to solar and wind, won't even do the math on whether it works or not. Nuclear is too long construction timelines, so they've screwed themselves on that one. And Nikki, you're going to love why they won't consider less polluting and cheaper natural gas. Like, I really dislike Danielle Smith, but even I wouldn't go so far as to compare her with Vladimir Putin. But the Moe government does. The minister of this, yeah. So SaskPower has coal, but not a lot of natural gas. And we shouldn't become dependent on Alberta natural gas, said the minister, because how did that work out for Germany to become reliant on natural gas from Putin? So, so yeah, are you guys okay? That's where it is at in Saskatchewan. Now, I don't know, Nikki, I don't know who Scott Moe thinks Danielle Smith and her army are planning to invade.
Yeah.
Leading to embargoes that cut natural gas supplies to Saskatchewan. But your premier, might want to give Premier Moe a call to find out what he knows. Because, I do hear that your provinces are having some issues. So there you go. A quick update on a small province that used to elect governments that inspired a country, now doing energy planning by conservative politics, the most expensive way known to humankind. Well played, Scott Moe.
Yeah, an interesting thought process there, too. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Jennifer Howard. Jennifer Howard, welcome to Left, East to West. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Jennifer, we're going to dive into a lot today because you have been a health policy advisor to Manitoba Premier Gary Dewar, then an MLA in the Manitoba legislature, served as Minister of Labour, Finance Minister, and then later as Executive Director for the Public Service Alliance of Canada. And then after that, Chief of Staff to former federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. So it's a pretty impressive series of jobs. We are actually going to start with your last role, though, with Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDP. We'll hand it over to Tom.
Yeah, just wanted to, think about the last election. One of the interviews I saw with you after, you said the ballot question of the federal campaign became who is best to deal with Trump's economic attack. And your words were, being the answer to questions about the economy is not often something that is a strong suit for the NDP. So we want to come back to that. But on economic management, especially in the last few months, we've seen Mark Carney take a turn towards privatizations and foreign ownership options that he never talked about with Canadians. How has that made you feel? Where do you think Mark Carney is taking Canada?
Great question. I mean, how does it make me feel? Sometimes it makes me feel like yelling at the TV that we were right. And not that
Just feel like it or doing it.
Sometimes I might do it. Not that that's very productive, but, I know there are many people maybe who are surprised by the way he is governing. I am not surprised by the way he is governing. I think we tried very hard, not successfully, to tell people like this is who he is. He has built his life and career with an abiding faith in the private market as the answer to all problems, whether that be housing or climate change or you name them. And that's how he's going to govern. And that is how he has governed. And I think also, I in politics have seen a few times people come in from a successful career in the private sector, in business, as CEOs, what have you, into politics. And they tend to try to run politics or government like they're running their business, in the sense that they don't really want a whole lot of input. They are in charge. They chafe at the accountability that is expected of you when you are in government, in terms of having to face the media or the opposition. And I think we've seen all of that from him. So I'm not surprised by the way he is governing. I hope, we'll see, I hope that for all of those voters, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, who lent him their vote, who are typical New Democrat voters or describe themselves as progressive voters. I hope for them, I don't want to suggest anybody was wrong in the way they make their voting decision. That is a decision you make. But I hope for them it shows the need for, if not a NDP government, at least a strong New Democrat caucus to act as an insurance policy. Like, I do think that's also part of the story here. If there were 30 or 40 New Democrats elected, strongly holding the balance of power, if a majority government had been out of reach, I think we would have been able to temper some of this. We would have been able to work with those progressives that are still in the Liberal caucus, who apparently are too timid to even let their names be known. But we would have been able to work with them to rein in some of these things. And so, I hope that is a reflection going into the next election. Like, you need the NDP. You need the NDP. To make sure that those issues, whether it's labor rights, which I think we're now starting to see be eroded, or action on climate, or, just not putting all our faith into the market to fix everything. You need the NDP there to be making those arguments.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we saw the need for the NDP there in the last parliament as well, and some of the progress made around things like the pharmacare plan.
100%. Yeah. So those things don't happen. Like pharmacare, when we were in negotiations about the supply and confidence agreement, dental care was the easier win, honestly.
Yeah.
Pharmacare was the thing that they did not want to do. And they did not want to do it at every step of the way. We had to drag them into doing it. And they still don't want to do it, I think, as is pretty clear. So, you're right. Those things don't happen without us there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we're seeing, too, is, recently when asked about if she'll cut the pharmacare plan, the federal health minister, Marjorie Michel, is saying no. But she is talking about those agreements with provinces expire, which is so core to the pharmacare plan. So that would be a yes. So in terms of that confidence and supply agreement with Trudeau and playing into whether that was worth it, you have talked about how the deal did make it harder to attack the Liberals, sort of harder to highlight that distinctiveness. But what are some of the other outcomes of the deal now? Are these now, ironically, opportunities for the NDP to actually assert how distinct the party is and to make some of those contrasts as they seem like they may be at risk?
I think it can be. I think it can be if we choose to do that. And I think with something like pharmacare, the opportunity for us is to talk about it more as an affordability measure and less in the way we typically talk about it is like, this is the final part of Tommy's great vision of healthcare. And, it's very, like, for us, it's a very much a moral imperative. But we should be also talking about it in terms of affordability, which it absolutely is. And I think, you will know in BC, the huge difference that making contraception available without cost has been in that province in terms of the choices that people make about what kind of contraception. They don't have to worry about the bill, so they can be free to make a choice that works for them. And we know, and I think what we knew with dental care is that once people have something like that, once they have the benefit, very hard to take it away. Much easier to take away a theoretical construct. So on pharmacare, even though, I would have loved to have been able to make more progress to go all the way, we knew that getting some deals on some drugs, getting some part of the way there would make it a little bit harder to take away, would give the NDP, the movement, something to fight for that was real to people. And, oftentimes that's the way these things happen. Like, I know there's a big debate about incrementalism, but in my career, change kind of does happen in steps, by increments. You get a step, you defend that ground, you try to push it to the next step, you defend that ground. And I think that's what pharmacare was in that agreement. I think dental care, though, is much more durable. And I still, God help me, sometimes watch Question Period. And it's always amusing to me, like whenever the Liberals are asked a question about affordability, what do they go to? Pharmacare, dental care, childcare. Right?
Yes.
All things that would not be there but for the NDP. And two of three of those things, childcare and pharmacare, which they are systematically trying to undo right now.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I was at a speech last week or so at the Web Summit where the BC Finance Minister Brenda Bailey was talking about some of that incrementalism as well in finance, and she comes from business, and she was a pretty significant crowd on the main stage, and she was talking about that difference between being in business and testing and being able to take that risk versus government that sort of has to go step by step and see if it works. And I think we see that with some of the pharmacare rollout. We certainly talked on the show before about the happy dances that people keep doing when they go get their now free HRT from the pharmacy in BC. So, and with affordability issues, that's huge right now.
It's huge. I mean, those drugs are hundreds of dollars a month for some people. I have spoken to many women who were like, but for this, I would not be able to afford it, or I would be making compromises. I'd be like, I'm going to do this much, but not that. I'm going to take this part of the drug, but not that part of the drug.
Absolutely.
And I think there's another story in that one too, that maybe somebody like Avi could be because of who he is and the politics that he brings, can be good at telling, which is, this is public enterprise shaving billions and billions of dollars off of really rich and kind of predatory global companies that are making you pay a lot, but we can have this public option that brings down the price. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this.
I think that's the unknown or uncelebrated part of pharmacare, is how much it does also save the overall healthcare system because of the opportunity to purchase those drugs in a way that, we're not enriching pharmaceutical companies as much. I think it's kind of ironic, like although he's doing it badly, like, this is what Trump is now trying to put out there.
It's true.
His own contribution. And he has been pretty vocal about taking on drug companies. And, we should hear that and know that, like, he is talking to the voters that we have to talk to in the way that we have to talk to them. Yeah.
For sure. But let's just come back to that comment you made when I saw you on TV, being asked about economic questions not often being the strong suit of the NDP. But you were a finance minister. You had to craft budgets and you had to sell budgets. What do you think, if you could kind of distill it all down, what do you think is the fundamental difference between a social democratic budget and economic approach compared to kind of neoliberal one? And for the NDP, are there policy gaps in the approach that we need to work out, that we need to fill out to color in the gaps, and communications gaps that prevent our spokespeople from leaning in when it comes to questions of jobs and affordability, rather than kind of react by maybe pivoting to something else? Do you think there's some, what's the work to be done here?
I think some of it is confidence, honestly. Like, I think some of it is being confident in our abilities to manage economies. And we do a good job of managing economies everywhere we govern. And you talk about the fundamental difference. For me, it was always that, I saw our job as government in terms of the economy. Our fundamental job was making life better, fairer, easier for the people doing the work that is the engine of the economy. And I think Liberal Conservative governments see their fundamental job as making life better, easier, fairer for the businesses that are the engine of the economy. Now, we wanted to make things good for businesses in Manitoba, absolutely. But, for every business that came into my office to lobby me on not raising the minimum wage or cutting their taxes, which would always be the opening, and we always say, we're not going to do those things. The next things were, we need skilled workers. We need roads to our factories that people can get to work. We need affordable housing closer to where the jobs are. We need reliable public transit so people can get to work. We need childcare so people aren't worried about their kid. We need home care for people's parents so they're not taking time off work to deal with elder care. And those are all the things that we provide. And so I just think we have to talk about the economy in economic terms, but also explaining that to create a healthy economy, you need workers who can show up to work, be productive, be happy, be well-trained, make a good living, feel like they're being treated fairly. And that is actually what fuels the economy. We should talk about things like infrastructure in that way. Building roads and bridges enables the movement of goods and people around. I think often, we get not trapped, but we like to talk about these things in like, we're doing the right thing for the sake of being good people and doing the right thing. And we don't make those connections. And we should make those connections more clearly and more obviously. This is how childcare is not only going to help you, but is going to help our economy. This is how not having to pay health insurance premiums is a benefit when you're trying to attract businesses to Canada. We need to be more confident in our approach. I think, New Democrats, we buy the myth that we're not good at these things. And so we always sound a little bit unsure of ourselves, or we're quick to kind of abandon our belief system. Or, I always say, like, New Democrats, our reaction, when somebody says, you guys are bad at the economy, we're like, oh, maybe we kind of are. I don't know. Are we? Like, we don't kind of stand our ground and say, no, we're not. And here's all the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think aside from, so that broad economic approach, and you started to touch on this a bit in general, and I think even beyond where New Democrats might be in government, do Social Democrats need to embrace and maybe start to push more sort of a different political approach to budget making and economic development than neoliberals? Like, what's that different role for economic partners as well? I think of, the labor movement, but I also think too of where there's, sectors. Well, we had an interesting conversation last week, for example, about watershed security and the role of watershed security in the economy. So, what are some of the approaches that you think maybe could be pivot for Social Democrats?
Well, I think one of the things we did in Manitoba that was smart, that has been done in some other places, is we put business and labor at the table together, and gave them a lot of opportunity, a lot of ability, a lot of influence. They spoke directly with the Premier, but we also put them together when it was time to work out problems. When we were going to change labor laws.
Yeah,
we put them together in a room and they worked together on a committee, and both sides knew that we weren't going to move forward unless they came to some kind of consensus. Right. Like, if they left it to us, they could do that. Probably neither of them were going to love the outcome. They had to work some of those things out. And I think it showed that they could work things out. Like, I'll always remember being at federal provincial labor ministers' meetings, and the lunchtime was usually we kicked all the staff out and all the ministers just talked to each other and nothing was on the record. And we got into this discussion about, like, how long do you wait before you bring in back to work legislation? Like, how do you know when the right moment is? Because if you do it too soon, then the employer isn't going to negotiate. And if you wait too long, then the public. And I just said, like, this is very easy for me. We never bring in back to work legislation. We never have. And both sides know that we never are. And so that means they all have to come to the table and get a deal. Like, we will provide conciliators, we will provide arbitrators, we will provide a strong legislative infrastructure, a labor board that works, all of that, but we aren't going to solve the problems for them. And so they have to do it. And they did as a result.
Yeah. Do you think, just to carry Nikki's point on one step more, do you think that sort of social partners approach can be pushed into areas that are like productivity or innovation?
Absolutely.
Where we often don't step?
Yeah, I think so. I think you see many models in Europe where labor unions have seats on boards of companies. And there is a kind of principle of co-development, co-governance, and having those labor unions at the table, always being clear of everybody's role, right? Like that's not a replacement for collective bargaining, but having them at the table to talk about, like, how can we make this company more productive? What is the kind of innovations? What are the investments that can be made that are actually going to work to drive productivity? I remember in Manitoba, we had the Maple Leaf plant in my hometown of Brandon that came to town, changed that city, brought in tons of temporary foreign workers. But the union, UFCW, and the employer worked together to make sure that those temporary foreign workers had a path to citizenship. We brought them in under our provincial nominee program. That meant they had a path to citizenship. We helped fund at work English as a second language programs so that they had access to that training. The employer gave them paid time to take that. The union was a champion of it. That was government and the union and the employer all being together at the table to create a stronger workforce that could add shifts, add productivity, change the nature of that community, and add value to the agricultural product that was already coming. Instead of sending hogs out to be finished somewhere else, we were doing it at home and selling the product to the world. And I think that is a great model. It works.
Shifting up a little bit, strategy, thinking strategically, and you've been in different parts of the country which are really operating in different strategic paradigms. In Manitoba, where you come from, like BC, like Alberta, like Saskatchewan, it's a two-party race. But then you shifted up to that's subjective, federal politics into a multi-party situation, more like what happens in Ontario or Nova Scotia or right now in Quebec. What do you find about the differences, like the difference in dynamic, and how does that play into the strategies that would work perhaps in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, but strategically they really have to be thrown out in a multi-party federal politics situation? What are some of those things that you've learned in dealing with both?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I was never able to solve, and I haven't seen a satisfactory solution, is how do you counter that strategic voting argument that is so compelling to so many progressive voters. Like, I can't tell you the number of people that we talked to in focus groups at the doors that we heard from in polls who are like, I like the NDP. My mother always voted NDP. I like the leader. I think the policies are great. And I'm going to vote Liberal because I have to stop the Conservatives, right? It's a very compelling argument. It's an argument we used in Manitoba, even though the Liberals are less of a threat there, right? We only win when they are suppressed. And so we use the same argument, right? There are two choices. You got to get on board with us because we're the ones that can win.
Or Greens in BC.
Or Greens in BC. Yeah. Like we also used that argument. So I didn't find the secret sauce there. I think we were closest in the dying days of the Trudeau government when we had started to overtake, just kind of started to overtake the Trudeau government as an option. But there are two things that we found were essential that I think any NDP federally is going to have to figure out. You have to prove to progressive voters that you can win, that you can beat the Conservatives. You have to find a way to make that argument and to make it credible. Yeah. And then you have to prove to voters that once you win, you can actually do the things that you're talking about doing. Both of those things you have to prove. I think people, unfortunately, are much less ambitious about what they think governments can do. And that's why arguments like, axe the tax work, because people are like, well, I know governments can raise and lower taxes. That's a thing I'm confident they can do. Can they build me a house I can afford? I have never seen it. I don't know if that's a possibility. Totally. So, we have, that doesn't mean that we're modest in our ambitions, but we have to really compellingly explain to people how we can practically make their lives better. And we have to show them we can win. And that's, very difficult. I don't think that we found the right combination to do that. In a different electoral situation, if you have, I think if this last election was a contest between Carney and O'Toole, we would have done much better. because pretty similar people. Not as scary a guy. But where things are so polarized is just very challenging for us. Maybe there's an argument we can make in the next election that, hey, you missed us, right? You kind of need us there, right? So elect enough of us to make a difference. Maybe. But
that gets
honestly,
back on the board.
Yeah, but honestly, like voters, I don't know that they make their decisions that way. Like for them, it's very, people really felt that voting for the Liberals and voting for Mark Carney was their patriotic duty in the last election.
For sure,
right? And they were also like, there was this weird thing where, they were being told, I know you're a New Democrat. I know this means you have to sacrifice what you really believe, but it's a sacrifice for the country. And then people felt good about that, right? That is pretty hard to, I don't know what beats that, honestly.
2 weeks ago, Danielle Smith and Mark Carney struck a new deal lowering industrial carbon prices, promising more pipelines. We're certainly feeling the impact of that in British Columbia right now on decision making. And so the latest in a series of these grand bargains, each of which was supposed to be final, each of which then energy companies have reneged on. We're breaking past deals, demanding new ones that are more lucrative to companies and more costly to taxpayers. And so a lot of this really has been fueling the separatist movement, now a referendum coming on referendums in Alberta, and the far right. So we're in this political context that Canada's not working, and another round of concessions here from the feds can prove that it can to Albertans, apparently. So round we're going, and I certainly feel like people like Premier David Eby are feeling like it's a bit of an old movie back over again and some frustration. Give us some Coles Notes history lessons on sort of the series of final grand bargains and their abandonment. What are your thoughts on how we get off this destructive political carousel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about, Rachel Notley's government that kind of struck the first grand bargain that I think had real teeth, right? Like in exchange for getting a pipeline built, which we all still own, by the way, that we were going to have stronger regulations, stronger emissions caps, all of the things that they had agreed. That was the first grand bargain. And then, unfortunately, she lost and the next government came in and they weren't going to keep their part of the bargain, even though we, built the pipeline, owned the pipeline. As far as I know, it's doing what pipelines do, not to fill capacity. And then, we heard about all the other things that had to be done to satisfy big oil and gas. And I think we should be clear, right? It's to satisfy the oil and gas industry. I don't actually believe it's about satisfying Albertans. It's mostly about satisfying the oil and gas industry. And I think
it's about freaking out Albertans to some extent.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's about getting them sensitized and anxious and having these right-wing bigots do all kinds of stuff to say, play into some old historic themes.
Sure. And I do think that on our side, we have to take some responsibility for some of the way some of us have spoken about Alberta and oil and gas.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about people's jobs as being dirty jobs, when you kind of flippantly talk about the just transition with absolutely no meat on that for people, when you talk about we're going to leave it all in the ground, when you're that's the way you're talking about people's livelihoods, we shouldn't be surprised that folks get kind of freaked out about that. And I don't think that we, or frankly the environmental movement, has done a good enough job of really reaching out and incorporating people's real concerns and talking about a path forward. But, one thing that I know about industry and companies, and I don't think they're evil, I don't think they're bad. I think what they are designed to do is to make as much money as possible. That is their thing, right? They are not social actors. If they do good things for society, it's because there's profit in it or there's a choice to it. And so governments have to regulate. And I don't know now where the big carbon capture storage, I don't know what the incentive for that is anymore, unless it's going to be regulated, unless there's going to be a law, because there's no more economic incentive. Originally it was, we're going to make it too expensive for you not to do this. I think that's gone now. So will Mark Carney eventually, like he has said, they have to build it, but what does that look like? Will he eventually legislate, or is that the next domino to you don't have to do that either?
Or is he saying, Jennifer, it has to be built?
Yeah, it has
In
to be
other
built.
words, the
We're
who's
gonna build
paying
it.
for it part.
We're gonna build
We'll
that
find
as
out.
well.
Yeah, the who's paying for
Yeah.
it.
So like I do think, what you learn, I'm going to talk about parenting for a minute. What you learn as a parent, right, is every step forward you take, like your kid backs up. So, same is true when you're negotiating with company. Every time you move forward as a government and you give something, they take it and they take it and they take it. Eventually, you have to draw the line and maintain the line. And so far we haven't seen Mark Carney. And what has it bought us, right? Like I watched the broadcast from Danielle Smith where she said, look, we're getting everything we want. Alberta's doing great. The government's giving us everything, and we'll be voting to separate.
Yeah, here's a referendum. Yeah.
Yeah. And she'll think up some new things that later.
Absolutely. And from her perspective,
keep the knife to the throat.
Yeah. I mean, she wants to be the premier, and in her party, that's the only way you get to lead the party. But, what have we learned from this? Like all of this kind of giving, which is a cost to the rest of us, right? Like I keep hearing people, start this conversation by the world has changed. Yeah. You know what hasn't changed? Science has not changed.
Yeah.
The things that were true 5 years ago, 2 years are still true. More fossil fuel emissions makes climate change worse, makes life worse for us and our kids. That is still true.
Yeah.
And that still has to be reckoned with somewhere down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
I feel for David Eby. I kind of reminds me at high school when you're like watching the popular guy keep going after the people that don't like him, and you're sitting there going like, what about me? I like you. I'm willing to work with
I know.
you. I'm like,
we're friends.
Come on. Why wouldn't you sit at my table for lunch? Why do you keep going to those mean girls over there who don't want to talk to you?
Yeah, it's been a bit of wild times. I think I don't envy anyone in BC politics right now trying to navigate all of this.
Or somebody kind of being catered to because they're the one who keeps threatening to leave the family and that's kind of what Danielle Smith does, and like there seems to be very much a pecking order of premiers now, and she's at the top of it by playing the game that she's played. It really makes me wonder whether Carney is playing this the smart way or maybe it's a smart way for the goals that he shares with her in some which is enrichment. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does believe that getting oil out of the ground into markets is our economic future. I think he does believe that, and this is the way to do it.
Yeah. No. I went to a speech earlier or last week, and in Vancouver, and I definitely think that there was a heavy focus on electrification, but a very heavy focus on BC being the pathway through to new markets and building out that independence. So it's all big picture pieces coming together.
All right, now Jennifer, you've worked as an elective official, a labor leader, senior NDP staffer, so you've seen a lot of things, and sometimes not always so great. Okay, this is recently I saw you made some social media comments about the culture that can exist inside of progressive organizations and inside the NDP itself. And you've raised concerns about the work environment you've seen from time to time. Do you want to just expand on that and maybe offer some ideas of how do we try and make it a place where people can do their best work?
Yeah. I mean, I think, not surprising anybody's worked in that field. It can be a high stress, high stakes environment. Nobody gets enough sleep or sees sunlight or eats well, and all those things kind of can combine to make the tempers short. But sometimes, and I think, people can be given grace for like you lose your cool sometimes, you say things you shouldn't, you apologize. I think we can all move on from that. I think what is more disturbing to me sometimes is a pattern that develops where people get blamed, staff get blamed when things aren't going well. And this is not about accountability when mistakes happen, but like we are trying to do a very hard thing in this country. To be a social democratic alternative to govern is a very hard path. And we are losing everywhere at the moment in terms of social democracy. Like few bright lights, like BC and Manitoba and New York City. But globally, our side is not winning. And so the temptation can sometimes be to really like punch down or cast blame and that is not motivating to anyone. I remember, talking to somebody about the last campaign, and I said, look, there's lots of things that were very hard. One of the things I'm proud of is like we did not create an environment where there was a lot of yelling and blaming. We heard horror stories out of the conservative environment.
Yeah.
That was not our environment. And the person I was talking to was like, well, maybe there should have been more yelling. I'm like, well, I don't actually think that would have motivated anybody to work any harder than they were working. I don't actually believe that making people feel bad and feel ashamed and feel like they're not good enough is motivating ever. And so, I would like for our movement to walk the talk and just be a little more frankly literate about the damage to people's mental well-being when we take our stress and our worry and our anxiety and just kind of spread it all around us instead of, owning it and trying to lift each other up and help each other out a little bit more. I think you can
and it drives good people away.
It does drive good people away. I think there are many good staff that I said goodbye to, and it wasn't the hard work and it wasn't the long hours. It was feeling like nothing they could ever do was going to be good enough for some of the people that they had to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like we do see, some cross-partisan attempts, particularly I think on the Hill, to think about that staffer mental health as well. But I always think too, and just in those general terms, is, we have this big job, like you say, and I think it needs every single person involved in it to stick with it, whether it's their staff or volunteers or donors or members. Like it's a big project, so we can't really afford to.
And social media has made it worse, right? Like we have, I think we have a really unfortunate culture among some of our members and supporters where they just feel free to unleash on social media against staff, against leadership, say very personally. And, like my challenge to the new leadership would be to take that on and to be clear that it's not acceptable. We have there's an opportunity to restart.
Exactly.
Let's make it clear that in this hard work that we are doing together, there's not going to be room for the kind of like psychological bullying and harassment that we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to close on that note. And so Jennifer, thanks for joining us. I think, there's some provincial governments that really need to be defeated right now and that needs New Democrats, and some big work to rebuild the NDP that, as we said, sort of takes every single person. Thanks for joining, giving us some frank insight on the challenges of doing all of those things. We're going to take a quick break and be back with Love It or Heave It.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Before we wrap up, we've come to the part of the show that we like to call Love It or Heave It, about something you love and want to keep, or something you'd like to heave and forever forget. What do you have this week, Tom?
Well, Nikki, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the tables on you this week because I am really curious. We didn't have the time. Are you loving or heaving the PM and the Prime Minister's comments in Vancouver last week, which seemed to be a bit of a triangulation linking federal support for major projects proposed by the BC government to whether BC is going to support his pipeline, or am I reading that wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think there was a bit too much in the speech to love it or heave it either one way. There were some good elements to it, and some I think that probably raised some eyebrows, particularly for the BC government. But I would say it was, with about 3 or 4 days notice, or over 1,000 attendees at the Prime Minister's speech to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, which I think is the first time a Prime Minister's done that sort of crowd here in Vancouver since about 2018. I couldn't remember off the top of my brain, but my Googling suggests that's the case. So, it was an important speech. It got people out for an early morning breakfast. And I think it was actually like a really interesting event to be at, but also because I always like to be at them to hear these narratives. And I think, the emphasis here was not a new message from the Prime Minister. And I think, Jennifer Howard touches on a little bit about what we know about this Prime Minister in our interview with her as well. And so I think, clear messages continuing here about that need for Canada's energy independence, but also economic independence in the current geopolitical state that we're in, the pressures from the states. But I think, given that the Prime Minister was going from that breakfast with 1,000 people into a meeting one-on-one with Premier David Eby here in BC as well, coming out of that Alberta MOU, continued negotiations and this pipeline piece that, Premier Eby's been very clear is frustrating because BC has put this long list of an increasingly long list this spring of major projects on the table, having some traction with the federal government, which I think, Carney talked about a couple of times as well. But still, this pipeline to Tidewater concept isn't going away and certainly doesn't seem to be going away after the update between the Alberta and the feds on the MOU in recent weeks. So, one of the things that really jumped out was the emphasis from the Prime Minister on needing ambition and this being the time to build, maybe going back to that, Scott Moe conversation, getting it right now to really fulfill that energy independence. But, at the same time, he talked a lot about how important BC is to this picture, particularly with electrification here being so high and being at that clean energy focus of the BC government, giving opportunities nationally that other provinces aren't quite at yet. But I think really there was still this emphasis on Canada being positioned to be, a highly desirable, low risk, low carbon global energy supplier, BC being important to that, and climate action, economic growth being important. But a couple quotes that really stuck out to me that I'm sure probably stuck out in Victoria as well, and would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversation that happened after were, the Prime Minister said too, it's time to build. And something that jumped out to a lot of folks, maybe outside of the business sector, where we don't want to hear what people are against, but rather what people are for. Yeah. So, pretty clear, pretty clear message there. But then, as he headed out to meet with Premier Eby, he also said that if progress stalls in BC on some of these projects, pipeline included, on these national interest projects, the federal government will be spending more time and money elsewhere in the country. So, there are definitely BC reps in the crowd and again, having what is looking like negotiations as well with BC and some of these energy projects now. But, I think as we talked about too, BC's been this good player and partner and so a little bit of a clear message coming out of this big speech to a large crowd.
Yeah, I just, the thing about, we don't want to hear what people are against, but rather what people are for. Yet Premier Eby has given the Prime Minister a list of major projects that he is for.
Dozens, yeah.
But now the Prime Minister is the one who's saying, well, maybe I won't back them unless you get along, play nice with Daniel Smith. It's like, what has that got to do with each other? And if you're going to make contingencies and linkages, why didn't you make any of those for Daniel Smith, who's out there boosting separatism and the destruction of our country? I just don't get that. Anyway, all right. I used my spot because I wanted to hear from you on that one. But Nikki, tell me, what are you loving or heaving this week?
I'm getting a little love to sort of an ironic but also touching event that happened at the BC legislature last week, where we're nearing into the final week of the session this week. So they're wrapping on May 28th. I think everybody will be happy for that wrap. It's been a very divisive session. So, I think nice to take an opportunity to bring people together, both from this current administration and from, former Premier John Horgan's administration, cabinet members, family, former staff, to do a naming. And there is some irony to this. There were some chuckles, I think, with New Democrats and also in the announcement. So the province renamed the Site C hydroelectric dam in northeastern BC after the former Premier John Horgan. And so I think it was like, the part I loved was bringing people together in what has been a tough legislative session with some very big issues on the table and also happening at the same time as the BC Conservative leadership race. But John Horgan and New Democrats had many moments, many years of standing up against this dam because the dam was a controversial issue for decades in BC. So, then became premier. And after I saw a lot on the news coming out of the naming of the times that John was up in the Peace River protesting Site C. So Ben became premier and it was underway and decided to continue with getting it built. So he was sort of well known for having said, people have strong feelings about Site C. There are so many positions on Site C, and I've taken all of them. So,
there you go.
I think sort of bringing in that touch of something that was controversial, well-timed, coming out of those meetings with Eby and Carney and focusing in on BC's clean energy future, because that, the hydroelectric approach here. But also, I think, no matter how you feel about the dam, and many feelings will continue for the decades it took to build it, probably kind of a moment to bring people together and remember a premier who had really identified challenges in governing and makes us still laugh in a heavy policy week.
Yeah. Well, okay. Love it. Heave it. You've heard that from us. What about you folks? Why don't you email us at lefteastowest@gmail.com with a short story about what you're loving or heaving, and we can talk about some of those next show. And next Monday, we have Shauna Sylvester from the Urban Climate Leadership, and the Monday after, Stefan Löfven, former Prime Minister of Sweden, now the President of the Party of European Socialists. He's going to join us. So tap the follow button on your podcast player to make sure you get a reminder in your podcast feed when these interesting interviews come out. So thank you for joining, and have a great week, Nikki.
See you soon, Tom.
Okay, take care.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We'd love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.